Okay, so this video will cover the technical regulations for 2021-22. These regulations will be updated throughout the year, so they may change slightly, but I just wanted to do a video covering all the major rules in this book. Obviously, there is this is a 32-page document, so there's hundreds of rules in here, but I just wanted to cover the main ones. I can't make it any bigger, I'm sorry. I want to have a model open so I can show you what it where the rules apply, and I can't make the screen any smaller on this side. So obviously this document's available. It's on the notebook. So if you want to access this document and look through yourself, you can check it out on there. So I'm going to scroll through a fair bit to start with. The first few pages, just the contents, and then it goes through a whole bunch of just definitions and general principles. Now, a lot of this stuff is real competition specific, talking about different categories and different types of penalties and that sort of stuff. So anything with a exclamation mark, orange exclamation mark next to it, will incur a time penalty. A lot of them are just points penalties for competition, and some are eligibility penalties, which will completely you may not be able to compete with a car if you break those rules. So different types of penalties which apply to different rules. This image here sort of covers the different parts of the car and defines what they're called. This little graphic here refers to the wing specifications, and talk about this a little bit later on, but our span, if I'm talking about the rear wings, our span is this distance plus this distance. Our chord is sort of this distance here, the width, and the thickness is the height of the wing. Same on the front. So your thickness is the height, your chord is the width, and this span is the length, but on both sides. Wing support structures, not super important unless you're in professional classes. And some more definitions here about different types of things. And there's some images about the stickers which you have to put on the cars. So these stickers have to be placed on the vehicle somewhere. And then there's some more general rules around hand finishing and engineering and that sort of stuff. Okay, so Article 2 or T2 is general principles, and this is a lot of generic sort of regulations around safe construction and compliance with regulations and that sort of stuff. Okay, so the T3 is where we start getting into the general car regulations, and it starts off talking about CNC manufacturing. So you have to use a CNC machine to manufacture your car, and it also talks about which surfaces you can machine it from. So there's machining requirements here for development class, which differ slightly from the cadet class ones. So in development class, you can machine it from the top and the bottom, whereas in cadet class, you can only machine it from each side. There's a bit of stuff around about hand machining and how you're not allowed to machine things by hand, but in cadet and development class, you can machine your axles by hand. There's some rules around how pointy the front can be. So that just basically stops you from making it as thin as a needle at the front. And some rules around finishing and assembly. So you're allowed to hand sand and that sort of stuff once it's been machined. So this will talk about the decals, where you have to apply them. So then we start to get into some actual rules. So things like the overall length. So the length of the vehicle from the very back edge here to the very front of the nose must be between 170 and 210. And there's some weight regulations. In cadet classes, 52 grams. In the other classes, 50 grams. You also have a regulation on track clearance. That's the distance from the road to the bottom of the car, and that's 2 millimeters. There's some rules around balsa wood components. So the entire body and any non-rotating components should be made out of balsa wood. There is some in development class, you can create your front wings out of plastic, out of non-metallic materials. It says you're not allowed to have voids or foreign objects or implants in your car, so you can't hollow out a part of the car and then cover it up. And you also can't put weights in there somewhere and make it heavier. So there's a rule about a side pod projected surface must be 15 high by 30 mil wide. So that's here. This is your side pods on the car. So I guess the main body, you've got side pods, front wing, rear wing, nose cone. So sort of dictates how big your side pods have to be. So 30 wide by 15 high. This is a 1-point penalty, and if you're going to break any rules, I'd say this is one which you could be a bit flexible on. Virtual cargo. So let's imagine we're designing a car, so the car has to fit a driver. This is the shape of the driver. So this object has to fit inside of the car. There's some regulations around the nose cone. That's only applicable if you're doing development class and you're designing your nose out of a 3D printed part. There's a whole bunch of wing regulations. So the first one's about clear airspace. So there must be around the wings, there must be a 3 millimeter clear airspace where there's no other objects or body. So the gap between your front wing and your front wheel should be at least 3 mil. There's very little that is going to break the rule on the back, unless you've got one of these rear pods. But 3 millimeters all the way around, clear airspace they call it, all the way around the wings. The front wings must be positioned in front of the front axle, so you can't have your front wing sitting back here somewhere. And there's rules around the size of your wings. So the span must be, if it's made out of balsa wood, 34 mil. So that is the distance from here to here and here to here. So what would that be? 17 mil would be the minimum width on either side of your wings. If it's made out of another material, so if you 3D printed it, then this would need to be 40 mil span, so 20 mil wide on either side. The chord, so that's this distance this way, so is a 15 mil chord. So this has to be at least 15 mil wide here. And the thickness, if it's made out of balsa, it has to be between 3.5 and 9. So that's the thickness this way. 3.5 and 9. If it's made out of 3D printed parts, then 1.5 and 9. There's some rules about the rear wing positioning. So obviously it has to be behind the front wheel. Behind the back wheel, and it has to be higher than 34 millimeters off the ground. Rear wings must be constructed out of balsa wood for development class and cadet class. So wheels, you have to have 4 wheels. They have to be the stock standard wheels which we get in the kit. So they were using the REA standard wheels, and they have to be unmodified, and the axles have to be unmodified, and the grommets have to be unmodified. There has to be 4 at the front and 2 at the rear. They have to share a common centre line. So that means you can't have sort of wheels in line with each other. So the wheels have to be freely rotating. You can't have them so they're locked in place and they don't turn. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but that's a requirement. Visibility in front view. So you have to be able to see your wheels in the front view above 15 mil off the road. So you can't have your front wings blocking your wheels by more than 15 mil off the ground. So the distance here, this can't be above that height. You also have to be able to see your wheels from the side view and from the top view. So make sure that rear wing is back far enough that it's not blocking that top view of your rear wheels. We have a selection of exclusion zones. So these are areas where you're not allowed to build body. And the key one is 15 mil behind the front wheel. So that's the reason why there's a gap here. And then there's also a triangular, I guess, shape behind in front of the rear wheel, which you're not allowed to build body on. That's the reason why this body sort of comes out on that angle. And then there's, I think it's 1 mil in front of the front wheel and behind the rear wheel. There's some real wheel support regulations, which are mostly around the professional class. We have to use the standard axles and the standard grommets. So the grommets is a plastic, little plastic plug which sits in between the wheels. I'll just hide this wheel so you can sort of see it. It's a little plastic ring which sits in there, and it basically works like a bearing. It makes the axle spin nicer or cleaner. So so you're not allowed to modify those components. You also need to have a thing called a tether line guide, which will be an eyelet which is underneath the car at the front and the back, and it will hold the car onto the racetrack when we're competing. We don't normally model them, we normally just fix them in afterwards. Development class, I would expect you to be modelling those eyelets at the front and the back, because you probably make them as a 3D printed part rather than using a screw-in eyelet like this. Bunch of rules around safety. There's also a part here about cadet class restrictions, about tether line guides. They'd like you to use the standard REA tether line. Again, there's a 1-point penalty. Information about the power plant provision. So you can only power the car using a CO2 cylinder. So I've got mine modelled in here. And the depth of this chamber, there's rules on the depth of, which elude me right now, I can't quite read that number. And the chamber must also be a certain distance from the track as well. So distance from the track surface. So it must be 22 mil in the cadet class or 20 mil in the professional class. So if we cut the body in half, the distance from the bottom of the chamber to the track surface, 22 mil in cadet class or 20 mil in development class. And after that, it's just appendices. So there's information about the starting gate. There's information about the blockers, so the block of balsa wood which you need to use to manufacture your car. There's information about how to insert the tether line guide if you're using the standard REA one. try not to use that tether line guide. It's not very nice. They've got specifications on the wheels and the axles and the tether line guides, and the grommets will provide these models for you, so you don't have to model these up yourself. Example of some drawings and some examples of wingspans and what's legal and what isn't. And that's it. So that's an overview of the technical rules for the competition. As I said, technical rules. There is another competition regulations booklet, but that's more about the judging and the criteria in that. So this is about the car regulations and what you're allowed to you're allowed to do with your car in terms of the design process. So hopefully that was useful. You will need to have a look through this book to just clarify certain bits and pieces, but that is an overview of all the rules in the competition.